Okay, we're live in the bunker. Let's talk about some garbage. So, I I gotta ask you something, Eric.
Yes.
How much do you know about a certain Corsican corporal? I erroneously last time it was mentioned referred to him as Napoleon, which is not his name. Not his name in a little bit. That was just me misspeaking. How much do you know about Mr. Napoleon Bonaparte, Mr. Straw on the Nose?
Oh, I assume not assume, I mean, I know okay amount. Obviously the audience doesn't know about, I don't know as much as you do about Mr. Napoleon, but I guess I know an okay amount. I've seen the 1927 Napoleon movie with you, just so the audience can know that. I saw that a couple years back with you. We watched the War and Peace miniseries a bit ago. Saw Bill and Ted where Napoleon's there. He's, inaccurately short in that. And yeah, Napoleon. What are you gonna tell me about Mr. Napoleon today?
Okay, so we also don't forget you watched the best Napoleon movie. You watched Sir Ridley Scott's masterpiece.
I didn't
Actually, have you
watch
watched
that
that
though.
yet? Oh, you
No,
haven't. Okay.
you're the one that watched that.
Okay.
Remember in
I'm
theaters.
prescribing my trauma onto you. That's my bad.
Yeah,
So
you were
in
messing me from the theater while the movie was playing, and I told you to watch the holdovers, and then you watched the day after. That's how the events went. It's during Thanksgiving week.
oh yeah, that was yes. So basically there's a lot of moments in Ridley Scott's wonderful movie that I really like, as you can tell by my tone of voice, where he
Mm-hmm.
takes a massive event and just condenses it into like 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most frustrating moments of that movie to me was his treatment of the Egyptian campaign because it's hard to explain. You probably saw the whole controversy about like the
I
shooting the
did.
pyramids. And, like,
I
his
did.
reason was like, "Oh, it was, like, to show that he, like, conquered the whole thing," which
Yeah, he came from nothing. He conquered everything. Remember?
he if you the Egypt campaign was not a success. Like, he lost. Like, it's an insane thing to say that, he had some pretty impressive battles, and he made some pretty good strides, and he pushed all the way to Syria, but he still lost. So to say that he conquered everything, and also, like, him shooting the pyramids to show, like, European dominance is just Orientalist slop. I fucking hate that movie. Alright, I won't fixate on that. But, basically I'm
But
bringing it up because I wanna talk a lot about
don't you remember what Mr. Ridley Scott said? He said the French, they don't even like themselves. So, like, he knows. And Jojo, were you there? Clearly not, 'cause that's what Ridley Scott said. Were you there?
that's true, but at the same time, Ridley Scott was not allowed in his house that one day, and I got to see the footage of it,
Oh, yeah, that's right. The photos of him outside his house.
so anyway, we're gonna talk a little bit about the Egyptian campaign, and the reason I wanna bring it up is it is an event in history that is it is a military defeat, but it is something that completely shifted the landscape of culture and
Mhm.
historiography and a lot of other things, and there's also a lot of insane facts about it that I don't even know how I could just do justice fully. So I'm gonna just kinda briefly go over a few things about it
Okay.
and go from there. We're first gonna set the stage. This happened during the era of the Directory in France, and I'm not sure how familiar you are fully with the French Revolution.
A little bit about it. Know some about it,
Mhm.
of course.
The Directory was the government after the Jacobins. It was after Robespierre gave himself a jaw makeover with a gun and shot himself.
Mhm.
They were not Jacobin radicals. They were kind of like just centrist Republicans. They were really corrupt, kind of sucked, but they were able to hold on to power for quite a while. And Napoleon was really able to hold. I pronounced his name wrong again. Yeah, this is a
Did
guy
you
I know
say
so much
Napoleon
about.
again? Did you say
I
Napoleon
did.
again?
I love it, it's great. Anyway, we're gonna keep that one in. He was able to just build a ton of political prestige during this time through his campaigns. But this is during the War of the Second Coalition, where France is at war with most of Europe. France's chief enemy throughout this entire period, they have a lot of enemies, but Britain is the main one. The only one that France can't just march in. Their sea power is a big threat to them. As Ridley Scott put it, you think you're so great because you have boats. Classic, classic line.
He was right, you know.
And at the time, Britain's crown jewel of their empire was India, and that was their main economic engine. So the thought of the Directory and the thought of Napoleon is that if they captured Egypt and captured Syria and the Red Sea, they would be able to create a staging point where they'd be able to starve England out of the Indian trade and eventually strike at and seize India. It's a pretty insane gambit considering how huge that region was, and they also it still have to go through Persia, but this is what their thoughts were at the time. So the mission that they kind of had set up was that they were going to sail from Corsica, which is the little island that Napoleon was born off of, sail down to Malta, resupply in Malta, and then from Malta go and invade Egypt, set up, and push into Syria, and then set up, and then eventually push east through Persia into India. That was the long-term goal, which was very unrealistic, but you know. An interesting thing about the campaign too is it wasn't just a military expedition. The campaign was really foundational for it pretty much created the field of Egyptology because Napoleon had a bunch of scientists, researchers, historians come along with him on the trip. This expedition is how the Rosetta Stone was found. This expedition was where
Oh,
a lot of the
okay.
first tombs were excavated and where a lot of the first steps in a lot of research into ancient Egypt and into these ancient cultures really started. It's where so much of this stuff started. It's also where
Okay, yeah, I forgot. Yeah, I remember this from history class. Yeah, that just rewoke a memory in me.
yeah, exactly. It's also where like Orientalism
Yes.
as
Yeah,
both
that
a weird thing that Europeans did and also a scientific I'm using air quotes, but you can't see them, scientific discipline started.
okay, yeah. If I recall, like basically every time that there's like big discoveries in Egypt, it basically just made everybody go cuckoo crazy about Egypt and like specifically ancient Egypt again. Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, thanks for waking that memory. I guess slightly off topic, right? But when they found King Tut's tomb, right? That's he wasn't like the biggest pharaoh, right? But like when they found him, that's kind of like is how we get the modern, I guess, like interpretations or not and modern, I guess, tropes of like ancient Egypt, in today's media is because there's like a whole mania behind him, if I recall. I don't know if you can like testify on that. That's what I remember.
So from my memory, King Tut's tomb, it wasn't that he was like the most well known or like
Yeah,
greatest pharaoh or anything. It was more specifically that
most complete one.
most
Yeah.
complete, best preserved. It hadn't been robbed or looted in all this time. His mummy was the best preserved. You had all these artifacts. It was like an incredible archaeological find. And
Mm-hmm.
also at the time you had this whole industry of Egyptology and this whole like establishment of this weird industry of just like put it best, just quirky white dudes that were obsessed with Egypt that just went wild over this stuff. Also, an interesting thing, not to go too much off topic, but as much as these European explorers found, they also destroyed in a lot of their excavation
That's
methods.
right. That's right. Yeah, the ways they open up the pyramids would permanently damage them. The artifacts inside. Yeah, they weren't very careful.
they weren't very careful, and they would also there was indications of them destroying pieces of artifacts and stuff that went against certain narratives because a lot of them were historians, but they were also propagandists as well. And
Hmm.
also, to be fair, this goes back to Napoleon because that's kind of what this expedition was it was both a military expedition, but it was a expedition for French propaganda to basically be like France is unearthing this ancient civilization and bringing back
Hmm.
the knowledge of the ancient world, and this is the Enlightenment of France is able to unearth all this stuff. The one thing Napoleon was more than anything, his greatest strength, in my personal opinion, was he was good on the battlefield, but what really made him what he was his propagandistic skills. He was the best propagandist until like the 1900s, at least in my opinion. He was really good at propaganda. So good, in fact, that he ended up buying into his own bullshit and marching his like all his men to go die in Russia, but that's another story.
Hmm. You can
So
go read about it
or
too.
you can read about it, or you can watch the four-part Moscow film movie about it. And here's we're gonna start talking about some of the crazy part about it that I find so fascinating. Because one of the things about the Egypt expedition, which makes me so mad with Ridley Scott, is that the way Ridley Scott describes it is like Napoleon came in, he was a super badass, and there were some really impressive
Yeah, he came
things.
from nothing. He conquered everything. Remember?
Like, especially the Battle of the Pyramids, which we're gonna touch short base. We're not gonna go super in depth. This isn't like beat by beat history, but a lot of this expedition was a complete farce, just from start to finish. Like an example, when Napoleon is sailing over from Corsica to Malta, he gets a copy of the Quran. It's a copy of the Quran that is printed by a Vatican printing press. So it is a translation from Arabic into Latin
Okay.
into French,
Okay.
and it's not a
Okay.
great translation. And this is what Napoleon reads. And granted, he reads it, he gets enough of an understanding that later when he's talking to imams and Islamic clergy in Egypt, he's able to impress them by being like, "Oh,
Wow.
I'm like a white person that's able to talk about Islam." But also, to be fair, Europeans didn't know anything about Islam, so him knowing even a little bit's impressive. But at the same time, yes, this is interesting. There's some crazy quotes about Napoleon and Islam, which we'll get into too. But yeah, so he basically read the equivalent of a Google translated version of the Quran on his boat over and was like really impressed by it. And I'm gonna read you a quote from this
Impressive.
is an actual quote from Napoleon Bonaparte. Muhammad was a great man, an intrepid soldier. With a handful of men, he triumphed at the Battle of Bendir. A great captain, elegant, a grand state. He revived the fatherland and created a new people, a new power in the middle of Arabia. There's like 20 or 30 quotes about Napoleon like praising Islam and praising like Muhammad and talking about like how we need like a state that's like centered in the Quran. No one talks about this. It's so just weird and out there, and all of it is propaganda to be like, oh, I would be such a great like I'm here to liberate you from Mamluk rule, and I'm actually the defender of Islam. But like it's so crazy. It's something that'd be so interesting to talk about, but like obviously no one talks about it, and it'd be great for something like satire. And it's also why like a movie like Ridley Scott's Napoleon makes me so mad is you have so much stuff like this from this guy's life that'd be great to pick apart, but you get like him barking like a dog under the table.
As you do, as you do. It's really weird because, right, like the first movie that made Ridley Scott famous, The Duelist, and takes place like during the same era, and like people have praised that movie as being like very accurate to the time period, and then he took his like time researching and such, and then he makes, he came from nothing, he conquered everything. The movie,
Yep, he came from nothing, aka like a merchant family that had a good bit of money, and he conquered everything, like a decent bit of Europe, but there's a lot of the rest of the world he didn't conquer. Anyway, that's we won't stick on that too much, but so this is a random question. The answer is probably not a lot because most people don't know a lot about Malta, but how much do you know about Malta, the place he's sailing to?
I guess not a lot. So let's go hear your spiel. Let's go hear your
So
shtick.
the reason I'm bringing a little bit of information about Malta is because the Knights of Malta, which is who established the island, were a
Mm-hmm.
group of former crusaders who set up on the island after one of the crusades. I don't remember which one. I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head remember which one, but basically after one
Huh.
of the crusades, they went to the island and they set up basically a crusader pirate state. And for hundreds of years, all they did was they were basically a pirate crusader order where they would just attack Muslims steal
Oh.
their stuff and be like, "Oh, we're doing this for Jesus," and then bring their stuff back to them. And this is what the state did for like hundreds of years.
Oh.
Uh Napoleon sails over and he's like, "Okay, we're gonna resupply here." The Knights of Malta are like, "Okay, but we can only facilitate two of your boats resupplying at once. We can't do more than that." But Napoleon didn't want to encounter the British Navy because if he encountered the British Navy, it probably would have mean most of his ships sinking and losing a lot of men. So he just didn't want to do that. So he's like, instead, he decided, all right, we're going to just seize Malta. And a lot of the Knights of Malta had French lineage because they were former crusaders, so they just didn't really want to fight the French. And so Malta didn't put up much resistance, so they just kind of like just got occupied, and then they just seized the island, and Napoleon put like a governor in charge, and they sailed over. The reason I spent so much time setting up the background of Malta is that Napoleon uses this in his propaganda when he gets to Egypt. So like he's very smart and he's very well read on this stuff, so he's like already kind of thinking about this stuff as he's moving along. And then he sets course for Alexandria, which Alexandria
Mhm.
is obviously a very ancient city. It's one of the oldest in the world, but Napoleon chose Alexandria as like one of the first places he conquered because he thought it would be like, this grand ancient old city because he read about it in books, because at the end of the day he's like one of these history guys that wanted to be like Alexander and stuff. Alexandria in this time is just mostly like like an old outpost, like that's nowhere near the size it used to be. It's much smaller, and fundamentally it lacks any form. I mean, it has fortifications, but it's basically significantly smaller than it used to be, and I just find it very funny because he chose this place as his sort of grand entrance, and it's just this like tiny port that can barely support his like his whole army, and he just chose it because he read about it in books. So he
Wow.
he, he kind of lands there. They end up fighting, and the battle for Alexandria isn't really too much of a it's not really too much of a struggle. The French have much superior arms, and they take the city pretty easily. The issue is
Hmm.
while they're able to seize Alexandria, a little bit after, there is the entire French navy is sank, the one that's out in the sea.
Hmm.
Basically, there's a very famous admiral, Horatio Nelson, who's like one of the big shots of the Napoleonic era. He is able to find Napoleon's fleet and just sinks the entire thing. It's a pretty
Wow.
long and arduous battle. But yeah, it puts a pretty big stupor on the plans because Nelson's kind of like a naval genius. He's basically the Napoleon of the waves, where he's able to trap the entire French navy in this port, and he just shreds
Hmm.
the entire thing. So Napoleon's just kind of trapped in Egypt now. He has Alexandria, and from there he's like, okay, well, we can't really go back, so we need to keep moving. And it's very interesting because he's kind of like presenting himself to the people of Egypt as like, "Oh, I'm here to liberate you from the tyrannical rule of your people." But they're like, "Uh, we don't really want to be French. Like, we don't really one anecdote I heard from the invasion was Napoleon's troops would be talking to some of the people, not assuming they didn't know what like a republican style of government was, and they'd be like, "Oh, a republic, like Plato's conception, like we know what that is," and then just kind of surprised the French that they even knew what that was. But yeah, it's almost like the French were very Orientalist and racist and just assumed these people didn't know anything. But they also met with a lot of stiff
Yeah, well,
resistance.
yeah, well, you weren't there, so how do you know?
That's
So
that's true.
the really
Because he
Scott would
did
say.
he did kind of conquer everything. And
Hmm.
also want to set a little bit more of the background just to give you just a little bit more idea of what's going on. So at the time, Egypt is ruled by the Mamelukes, who were a group of former slaves that ended up rebelling and seizing control of the region. They are now basically a group of like warlords. They are a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire. And
Mm-hmm.
so by invading Egypt, the French have basically pissed off the Ottomans, which is going to cause Napoleon a lot of issues. Because the Ottomans are a lot weaker than they used to be, but they're still like a great power. Now, Napoleon's next plan is he wants to march over to Cairo, which is a little bit to the east, and he wants to basically take over. He wants to take over Cairo, take the city, and then from there, just solidify his hold over Egypt. Cairo is a much bigger city, and then move into Syria to the north, and eventually cut off the Ottomans and solidify his control. The march to Cairo and a lot of the marching going forwards are just kind of a mess because Napoleon's whole battle tactics are about speed and about like moving quickly with artillery, and he's in the desert. So you have a lot of issues where his troops can't move the way they want to. They have limited resources with water. The
Mm-hmm.
the cannons are sinking. The local religious leaders basically declare that like to defend Islam, we need to like fight this guy. So he's also dealing with a lot of resistance. He's also dealing with resistance from the nomadic Bedouins. So the villages will be left empty and their wells will be dried, so they won't have any supplies. So he deals a lot of attrition and stuff. He eventually does make it to Cairo, and then he's able to seize the city. Actually, sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the Battle of
Let's
the
go back.
Pyramids, which is the Ridley Scott classic.
Class.
The Battle of the Pyramids takes place, which is it's called the Battle of the Pyramids, but the pyramids are very far off. It's not directly underneath them. The pyramids are not
Mm-hmm.
shot with a cannon. The battle, what's crazy about it is it's a bunch of like heavy Mamluk cavalry, like fully sabered up cavalry charges, but the French are using modern tactics, so they assemble in square formations and are able to fight off. The Mamluks have about 6,000 troops. The French only lose in this battle about 100 people, about 100 dead
Uh,
or wounded, while
uh,
The Mamluks lose about 1,500.
Jesus Christ.
So it's kind of an absolute slaughter, and it really heavily decimates their forces, and then that causes them to really not have too much of a hard time taking Cairo. Like there is a decent battle there, but they're able to seize the city. It's hearing about that battle, it's like it's super interesting, but when you watch it in the movie, there's like barely any tactics. They don't even get into squares in the movie. They just kind of shoot at the horses, and then they shoot
Oh,
the
they don't have the
pyramids.
squares? No square
No.
formation? That's crazy.
Which is like the most important thing if you know anything about like Napoleonic warfare. And then they like shoot the pyramid, and all the Mamluks get like really startled, and there's like epic music, and I'm like, this is fucking slob.
Yeah, but the French hate themselves, so what do they
Mhm.
know, you
What
know?
do they know? They don't know anything. In Cairo, they're having a lot of issues too. There's a lot of civil unrest, and there ends up being a full-on like civilian revolt against the French. Basically, the French need to keep this city. It happens quite a like they're holding on to the regions that they have, and they're here for quite a while. But in order to hold on to the city, they're kind of in a desperate situation because their boats are all sank, and they can't really lose Cairo. So
Hmm.
the way they put down the revolt is pretty brutal. The revolt is excited by like
Brutal.
the religious leaders, and they just kind of slaughter a bunch of civilians and just
Oh,
it's really rough. It's one of the most one of the most like horrific black marks on Napoleon's legacy is the revolt at Cairo, because he just ordered his cannons to open fire on mosques, just like murdered a bunch of people. It was just bad. It was just bad. But basically, kind of talking about this, the expedition from here, there's just a lot of floundering. They push into Syria, and they end up making it to Acre, but they're not able to seize the city. And through all this attrition and time, yeah, they just end up faltering. And the worst thing too is ends up happening is Napoleon eventually realizes that the expedition is doomed. And also, I'm doing really broad strokes and not going into the weeds because the main thing I want to talk about is this little juicy tidbit. I'm just giving you the full background.
Oh,
So,
let's hear it.
basically, when they're pushing into Syria and they fail, Napoleon realizes the expedition is doomed. So he just leaves.
Oh,
He just takes a boat, like a small boat that he's able to get of him and a few people, and he just goes back to France. And he ends up finding a way to spin his complete military defeat as a like triumphant return.
wow.
He does the coup of Brumaire and ends up installing himself as the consul of France, and then from there ends up becoming consul for life. And yeah, and that. So one of the things I find super interesting about all this, and I didn't go fully into the weeds of everything, and there's a lot of details that I didn't like dive into, and it was just kind of like a 20-minute overview, is
Hmm.
there's a potentiality in the Egypt campaign that I find to be so fascinating that I love talking about. And it's because I mentioned with the revolt of Cairo and a lot of the resistance he was getting, he was really starting to be worried about religious opposition and the religious resistance that he was facing throughout the region. And it was becoming a problem that he just fundamentally could not effectively deal with. How he ended up working with that, his plan was he ended up meeting with the religious clergy and basically
Hmm.
asking for them to call off their incitements and their denunciations of him. And he used his basic knowledge of Islam and the Quran to kind of back up his claims, and he basically asked, "Will you support me?" And their entire thing was, "We will support you against the Mamelukes if you and your entire army convert to Islam. And if you convert to
Wow.
Islam, we will support you in becoming the king of Egypt, and we'll help, and we will give you full backing to overthrow the Mamelukes and push the Ottomans out and become king of Egypt." And this is something that like he did consider. He considered enough that he gave himself a like hypothetical Islamic name, which was Ali Bonaparte. Like that is a thing that like
Ollie Bonaparte.
he has written down, and I find it very fascinating because like there's a bunch of other quotes too during this time where he's talking about how he wants to be like the sword and defender of Islam, and that he has not come to like overthrow the Islamic faith. Instead, he's come to uphold it. And he to prove his loyalty, he destroyed the Knights of Malta who used the cross to destroy the people of the faith, and like talking about how Muhammad did more for the people of the world than Jesus. Just like a bunch of stuff that you never hear about from Napoleon because it's just so out there. But this was propaganda, and he was really good at that. It's it's also something, yeah, you're not gonna hear about it in like any movie about it. And I just entirely want some sort of movie or some sort of TV show that just goes into this stuff because it's just so ripe for satire. This entire campaign from start to finish could just be like it's just an entire satire. It's ridiculous. Like the fact that he's like
Yeah, this is
he reads like basically a poorly translated version of the Quran and then spins this entire thing and is like, okay, all right, I can just convert to Islam.
as you do. As you do.
As you do. There's other quotes too. I want to read you one of the other ones where Muhammad was a prince. He rallied his compatriots around him. In a few years, the Muslims conquered half the world. They plucked more souls from false gods and knocked down more idols, raised more pagan temples in 15 years than the followers of Moses and Jesus did in 15 centuries. Muhammad was a great
Oh,
man. He would indeed have been a god if the revolution that he had performed had not been prepared by the circumstances. And he's just like a bunch of other ones too, where he's just talking about like how like we need like the world is prepared for like a society that's based on like revolutionary teachings and also the Quran and stuff. And That's kind of where I was just going with this, where it's just like, this is something you've probably never heard about, and anyone I talk to about is just like, why was Napoleon's I mean, obviously a lot of it was propaganda, but it's like this weird, like, side thing where Napoleon got really into Islam is just insanely fascinating. I was just curious your thoughts on it.
I feel like I should draw a comparison to a conversation we've had, but I won't. But I'm sure you can insinuate what I was going to draw a comparison to, but it kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah,
If you
no, I
catch
get
my
what you
drift.
yeah, absolutely get what you're saying. I think that,
So so random.
it is insanely random. I've also been reading a little bit about, Hong Xiuquan, which is, like, the guy that did the Heavenly Kingdom Uprising. And, like,
Hmm.
he just he, like, thought he was the brother of Jesus, and, like, that whole story is insane, and the fact that him thinking he was the brother of Jesus led to, like, the death of, like, 30 million people. But what's even more insane of that is he didn't even read an entire translation of the Bible. He only
Oh,
read, like, excerpts of it,
oh,
and then he kinda just filled in the blanks in his own head.
oh.
To the point that when he got his own version of the Bible, he, like, ended up crossing sections out and being like, "No, this is more accurate. This is, like, the true telling of it."
Reminds me of the one misprinted Bible where it says, "Thou shalt commit adultery."
We need that one. I think that's, like I think that's essential. Also for Napoleon, I think that would work out pretty well for him.
Yeah.
He was, like, very oh god, his whole thing with Josephine was so weird. There's an entire little, there's this ridiculous anecdote where he found out Josephine was cheating, and he just goes into his tent, and he just starts muttering divorce under his breath for, like, 5 minutes, and this is well documented too.
Oh, I know. I'm very well aware. He's very well documented. He's like probably one of the most well documented people in history, right?
He was such a freak, but he wasn't a freak in the ways that most people think he was. Everyone's just like, "Oh, he's short and he's weird," but he was just like he was so much weirder than that, but he was also like he was like average height. People think he was short because his like weirdo nephew was short. Napoleon the Third was short, and everyone just confuses the two of them. So that's why he gets like the short moniker, which Napoleon the Third was funny because he was just Napoleon, but he was like a fail son
Hmm.
where he, like, just used the Napoleon name, but he just kinda sucked. It's also ridiculous too, because if you read the story of Napoleon the Third, it's just a situation of, he kept trying to do coups, and they never kicked him out of the country, and then he eventually got away with it. He did,
Wow.
like, 5 coup attempts, and they just never actually got rid of him.
Wow.
Also, on the topic of, like, I guess, the entire Egyptian campaign, it is also crazy to think that this entire ridiculous endeavor is the reason that we are able to translate hieroglyphics and we know what they say, and that if a single
Right.
shot or cannon had hit the wrong place, the Rosetta Stone may have been destroyed, and that could have set back that entire field by so much time. Also, another thing too is that the Rosetta Stone was captured by the British, so the French didn't even get to use it.
Imagine not having the Rosetta Stone today.
That
Then
would yeah.
you won't have that might like lead to like an alternate world where you can't watch, really Scott's Napoleon. Like think
Oh,
about that.
man. That's, like, the big downside of not having the Rosetta Stone, because like, you wouldn't have all this information about hieroglyphics, but you also couldn't watch, like, Ridley Scott's Napoleon. Instead, he might have made, like, well, what would be another Ridley Scott movie he could have made? He could have made, like I don't know, we could do, like, Ridley Scott's Stalin. I think that'd be a good movie.
Really Scott's Stalin. Sure.
Oh, I was just thinking, the movies. If I ever talk more about Napoleon, it's just always gonna be in context of that Ridley Scott movie, because like, there's so the entire tactics of, like, Napoleonic era is, like, they used so many different tactics, but all of them in the entirety of the movie, so many of the battles is just Napoleon just, like, waving his hand forwards, and they just kinda, like, awkwardly fire at each other. There's also a scene in that movie where one of the guys is using, like, a scoped rifle, and those didn't
Oh.
exist until, like,
Yeah.
1880.
Yeah, like what?
They they didn't exist until after the American Civil War, and one of them is just using that. It's so fucking stupid.
I feel like that would contradict all the battle strategies or lack thereof in the movie.
And the guy using the scoped rifle shoots Napoleon's hat off, and it's like this like a really dramatic scene. Also, like Josephine is like alive after she died, and there's a whole scene, but like she was dead in real life during this scene, and it's just like what?
I think you read the wrong Napoleon textbook. This is, exactly what happened because you weren't there. How do you know?
That's true because like the French hate themselves, and I guess
Hmm.
Ridley Scott knows more about France.
He does. Because you weren't there, but he was.
I will say I do think you should watch it. It's just insane. Like it's it's so I get that historical movies aren't going to be like one to one and they're not going to be completely accurate. But you have so much to work with someone like Napoleon, and you don't even use any of it. All you do is that like he was like a weirdo, and like he didn't like that the British had boats, and he was like a cuck towards Josephine. That's all you have. That's all he could come up with.
I mean, could you come up with more? Like you weren't there.
That yeah, you know, that's a good point. I think what I would do instead is I would have an entire like 40-minute scene where it's just like it's like video footage of like Ridley Scott snoring, and I would just put
That'd
that in
be-
the movie.
oh yeah, it'd be like the Andy Warhol movies where he films the guy sleeping for like 5 hours.
I will say the
Like
only thing good about the Napoleon movie is the costumes.
I think you're just jealous. Here's the quote from Ridley Scott, directly. He said, "I don't know if he did that, but it was the fast way of saying he took Egypt. So you just don't understand the director's intents.
The fast way of saying he took Egypt for
Yep,
like 2 years and then he lost it.
it's accurate. It happened.
Yeah, it drives me crazy, but I also need to move on. It needs to happen. But I spent like and it was completely irrelevant. It was completely pointless. No one forced me to spend so much time researching Napoleon for this stupid movie. I just did it because I wanted to, and I kind of just cursed myself because I spent like days reading about, or not days, like weeks reading about Napoleon and like
I
researching
recall.
Napoleon. And I did all that, and then the movie was just poop the movie.
How do you feel on that?
I mean, I'm glad I know a lot more about him now, especially like I was able to talk a little bit about that, but there's a bunch of other stuff too where you have his early life is super fascinating, and like especially like the early parts of the foundation of the empire, and like the early parts of the consulate. I don't like talking about Haiti because that's just depressing. That's like I can't there's nothing fun to talk about there. That's just miserable. But I wasn't there, so I don't know.
Hey, you weren't there.
Also, that's another thing that really Scott just skips over. He doesn't even mention Haiti like once, like not even like a single, like not even like a line. Laziness. Also, like, you're trying to squeeze so much into, like, one to be fair too, though, he's trying to squeeze I mean, I know it's, like, still a very long runtime of a movie, but this is a the amount of stuff that happened in Napoleon's life, you cannot fit it into, like, a couple hours. Like, there's a reason that when we talked about at the beginning, the Abel Gance movie we watched, that movie was, like, over 4 hours, and it was only until the Italian campaign, and it still felt like, that was a good pace. Um, you kinda if you're gonna make a Napoleon thing, you need to have it as, like, a multiple part long movie because there's just so much that happens.
A miniseries.
Miniseries would be better, like a miniseries or just a full-on, like, several season TV show would be a much better thing than just a single movie. Oh, and one last little thing I want to ask you, since we're talking about historical movies, how do you feel about what we know about Chris Nolan's Odysseus movie, the Odyssey
Oh,
movie? I call it the Odysseus movie, but it's about Odysseus, but it's the Odyssey.
gonna have our guy Tom Holland, so it's gonna be great. What more
Oh
could you
yeah.
ask for? What more could you ask for?
Why do the costumes look like that in the movie? That's one thing I'm curious about.
Well, to go to the theater and see. Maybe it's like I don't even know. I don't even have an answer for that, really.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I was just kind of asking as like as a last little bit to talk about because it was something I've just been seeing is I've seen a lot of people talk about the Odyssey movie and just thinking about the fucking visual of the costume with like the shitty cape and like the Roman looking helmet for like ancient Greece and stuff and yeah, well I guess we'll just see how it goes. So is there anything is there anything you wanna add? Anything you wanna say to the great people who are observing?
I remember watching the Odyssey miniseries in like high school. That's all I remember. Is I watched it. I don't really have an opinion on it. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
Napoleon.
Well, maybe one day we can get Ridley Scott's Solo and we can get that because the world
Oh,
needs
nice.
that. And that will
That'd
be
be
my
cool.
send off.
Hmm.
So have a good day, everyone.